Hello and welcome to Upstack America's Oracle EBS Financials Functional Training. My name is Bob and I'm the lead senior consultant for Upstack America. And with me today I have Victor, who is also senior consultant. And today we are handling lesson one of the accounts receivables module. And Victor, please walk us through.
Thank you, Bob, for your introduction, and welcome everybody to this session in our financials functional training series. As Bob said, this is the first lesson in AR, so we are going to be doing an introduction or an overview of AR, what the functions of the module are, or what part of the business cycle it handles, and we'll look at also an introduction to the setups that we will need to do as we go on. Okay. Now, we know about the order to cash part of the business cycle, and this is where AR comes into play. So there are various steps in the order to cash part of the business cycle. Okay. And let's discuss this cycle and see what happens. So when you want to purchase a good, okay, what do? So now we are looking at this as a company that's using the AR module, okay, which is the sales ledger. So they will receive an order from the client, okay. So once they receive the order, then they will go and check whether they have those goods available for delivery, okay, maybe in their inventory. If it's a service order, they will look whether maybe they have an employee in the field during that time, and they can schedule him to go and deliver the service at that particular time, okay. When the day arrives, the goods are shipped, or the services are the scheduled services are delivered. All right. Once the services have been delivered, then the company who is selling the services or the goods can now send an invoice to the person who they were selling the goods, the customer. All right. Once the customer receives the invoice, if they decide to honor their part of the transaction, they will make a payment, okay, and the company will get a receipt. They will receive the payment, okay. Then, of course, the company will do reconciliation at the end of their period, okay. This is to match their receipts with whatever they are seeing in their bank statement, okay. Of course, they might be doing reconciliation for their purchases too. So there's that, and then they can generate financial reports such as P&L, profit and loss statements, okay. So there's a module that in, of course, Oracle e-Business Suite or any other ERP system that they may be using. But in Oracle, there is a module that manages or is used for every part of this order to cash cycle. So for these first three steps, receiving and managing the sales order, and then scheduling for service delivery or booking goods that are going to be delivered to the customer according to the order, and then executing the shipment or service delivery. Those three first parts will be managed by the order management module. Okay. These two steps here, invoice creation and receipts, these are the parts that concern AR. Okay. Now, I have said here invoice creation, but when we go to the system, we are actually going to see that yes, when you're creating this, and send it to the customer, it's going to be an invoice for the customer. They're going to be inputting an invoice in their purchase ledger. But for us in AR, it's actually called a transaction. All right. So this part that involves entering the transaction, and then you print out an invoice and send it to the client. This part is handled by accounts receivable. When the client makes the payment, all right, and you apply the receipt to the transaction, all right, that part is also handled by AR. So that is where AR falls in the order to cash cycle. So what are we trying to say? We're trying to say that AR helps you manage helps the enterprise manage its relationship with customers. Remember we said AP helps an enterprise manage its relationship with what? Vendors or suppliers. AR helps the enterprise manage its relationship with customers, right? Now, just a quick reminder, we discussed this when we were doing the introduction to our AP module, and I just wanted to take us back so that we can remember or we can know that AR also utilizes operating units to segregate that subledger data. All right. And we looked at how applications will behave in this multi-org kind of environment, right? So you will have operating units, and we said that an operating unit is a place where what these subledger modules are being used. Okay. So when you create an operating unit, you don't have to create an operating unit for each application. No. When you create an operating unit, depending on the modules that you're using, those particular modules can use that same operating unit. Users having responsibilities belonging to different applications, for example, AP and AR, will not be able to see the other subledger modules data. Okay, so AR users in the same operating unit will not see like transactions, invoices, and payments for AP users, even though they're in the same operating unit. They're using different responsibilities. Those responsibilities belong to different applications. And of course, remember what multi-org allows you to do. You can have a responsibility that is allowed to see information belonging to separate operating units or different or multiple operating units. Let me say that. And right now you should remember how we are able to do that using the profile options. Okay, so we talked about different profile options when we are setting up AP, and we are going to be utilizing those same profile options as far as operating units are concerned in AR. So remember, this was the setup that we used to demonstrate. This was the diagram that we used to demonstrate what our Mascani setup will look like and the different organizations and their interactions. Okay, so we have already set up Mascani Developers Operating Unit and Mascani Property Management Operating Unit. Remember, we had to set up these business groups, okay, for each of the operating units. Assuming this was because the list of employees will be different for both operating units, okay. We associate an operating unit with a business group and a default legal context, all right. Legal entities which we associate, which are the default legal context, basically, which is what we are saying. Legal entities are associated with what? A ledger where they account for themselves, all right? And we are also associating operating units with a default legal context and therefore with these ledgers. So the sub-ledger modules being utilized at the operating unit level will be sending accounting information about these legal entities, about the transactions entered by the legal entity to the ledgers belonging to this legal entity. Okay, so this is something we are familiar with. I just wanted us to remind ourselves of all this multi-org environment. So because of those setups that we had done earlier, then it means in terms of creating legal entities and operating units, we won't have any setups to do. We'll be using the same operating units and legal entities, okay? This is an outline of the setup steps. So the first step, as I've said, we are not going to skip because we have already done it. The second step, which we are going to talk about in more detail once we start our setup, which is replicating seed data. And this is a concurrent program that you're supposed to run when you create a new operating unit, all right? And what it does is, according to Oracle, this is what they say in the documentation, that this program, it helps to populate some setup data required for a configuration or initial setup of the operating unit. Okay, so it copies some seeded data that is necessary for our initial setup or our configuration for AR. If we try to do our setup without running this program, we might encounter some errors. So after we do that, we need to grant access to operating units. Okay, how do we do that? We have to create responsibilities. Okay, we have to create responsibilities. This time, these are going to be receivables responsibilities. All right, we know how to create a responsibility, and all you need to do is specify the correct data group, menu options, and report group. Menu group and reports group, okay, for receivables responsibility. After that, we have to configure the system options. Configure. Oh, I put the step for payables here instead of receivables. My apologies. So we need to configure system options for receivables here. And we are going to see some of the options that we are going to have to set up for receivables. Okay. So we're going to set up system options. I made the change to avoid confusion. Some of the options that we are going to talk about include what? GL accounts. Okay, you have to set up GL accounts that will be used for receivables accounting. You have to set some receipt options. There are options for transfer of, transaction entries from AR to GL. We also have some customer options, and we have print options and auto invoice options. So there are a couple of things that we can talk about under system options, all right? And we are going to look at them and what each of these options help us to do. After that, of course, we are going to open our first period in receivables, and then we will be able to enter transactions. Once we have a working receivables module, which comes from doing this first 5 initial setup steps, we can now go and configure various optional or client-specific options and see how those changes affect the functionality or the working of our receivables module, right? So that is going to be our procedure that we are going to use to set up our receivables module. Like I said, we already did some initial setup by creating the legal entities and operating units which are going to be needed to segregate the accounting information. So we are going to skip this first step because we already have what we need. So we are going to continue from there in our next session. That was just an introduction. And Bob, unless you have something to add, we can end this session there.
All right. Thank you so much, Victor.
Thank you.